Hello and welcome to a new ASMR video in which I will be talking about the modern world. Since 1750, the world has seen huge turbulence in every area of life. Globe-spanning empires rose in the 19th century and fell apart as the balance of power shifted from nobles and emperors to everyday citizens. New technology transformed agriculture, industry, transport, and warfare, and a digital revolution changed communications and entertainment forever. From around 1750, new political movements called for kings and governments to grant more freedom to the people. At the same time, colonies began to seek independence from their ruling countries. When rulers and colonial powers refused these demands, the populace, the people, rose up in rebellion. The USA won their independence from Britain by force in 1783, thus inspiring other revolutions. Let us write this important. Yeah. USA independence. Seventeen 83. In 1789, the French people rebelled. King Louis XVI was deposed and executed. The revolution became a bloodbath as the new leaders turned on each other in an era of violence known as the terror. We will write also this year. The French Revolution 1789. After the French Revolution, a popular general named Napoleon Bonaparte became Emperor of France and began a long and bloody war of conquest across Europe. In the 19th century, German philosopher Karl Marx proposed a new theory of government called communism. It argued that the wealth of a country should be shared equally among all its citizens. In 1917, revolutionaries in Russia overthrew the emperor, or Tsar as they call him, to establish the world's first communist state. It would go on to become the USSR, one of the superpowers of the 20th century. Here we can see Vladimir Lenin. After the overthrow of the Tsar, Lenin declared himself leader of the people. He was the head of the communist government until his death in 1924. We will write also this year. Nineteen 17 Russia. Revolution. Between 1813 and 1822, revolutionary movements led by Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín freed most of South America from Spanish control. Mexico too became independent after a revolution headed by Miguel Hidalgo. We will write these years 1813 to 1822. South America. And Mexico. During the 19th century, European countries expanded their overseas colonies into vast empires. European armies were well trained and armed with guns, and were easily able to overcome resistance to their expansion. This policy of acquiring new colonies, known as imperialism, spread European rule over much of Africa, Australia, and large parts of Asia by 1900s. By 1914, a few powerful countries had control over almost every part of the world. The largest empire belonged to the British. Their colonies were guarded by a powerful navy which controlled seas and oceans around the world. We can see on this picture green color is the area controlled by British. War became ever larger and more bloody as rival empires threw their full might against each other. I will mention a few wars that were led before 20th century. 7 Years' War from 1756 to 1763 was the world's first global war, fought mainly between the empires of Britain and France, or colonies in India and North America. Then we have Napoleonic Wars between 1803 and 1815, as Napoleon Bonaparte proclaimed himself Emperor of France and waged a war of conquest. But at the end, he was defeated at Waterloo by an alliance of European powers. And then we have Crimean War between 1853 and 1856. Russia's attempts to capture land from the Ottoman Empire were halted when Britain and France allied against them. Opium Wars between 1839 to 1860. In these wars, the Chinese tried to stop British merchants from trading in opium. The fighting ended with the Chinese forced to open 14 ports to European trade. And then we have, at the beginning of 20th century, Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905. In this war, Japan's powerful, modernized army and navy inflicted a shock defeat on Russia over territory in China and Korea. European colonies in Asia and Africa found it harder to win independence than those in America. However, two world wars greatly weakened the European empires. India and Pakistan won their independence from Britain in 1947 after mass popular protests led by a lawyer named Gandhi. In Africa, Ghana was the first colony to win independence in 1957, and then many others soon followed. Let us write these 2 years. Then 1957, Ghana. In that time, Gandhi said, "You can chain me, you can torture me, you can even destroy this body, but you will never imprison my mind." The first half of the 20th century saw two of the bloodiest wars in human history. Each started with conflicts in Europe, then spread to countries all across the world. World War I, from 1914 to 1918, saw millions of fighting men killed in a bitter trench warfare. And World War II, or Second World War, from 1939 to 1945, brought battles between armies of tanks and aircraft, and the development of the atomic bomb. When the dust had settled, the world's most powerful nations were the US and the communist USSR. Then they fought a so-called Cold War, baked by vast nuclear arsenal. The First World War began in 1914 by the killing of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria in Sarajevo. And this caused a war between the German-led Central Powers and the Allies led by the French and British. Much of the fighting happened on the Western Front in France and Belgium, where attempts to capture heavily defended trench systems caused massive casualties. And only in 1918 did the Allies break through and defeat Germany. Here we can see World War I cemetery. Nearly 10 million soldiers died during World War I. Many of them were buried in graveyards near where they fell. 1914 to 1918, $10 million. That's and now World War II or Second World War. In 1933, Adolf Hitler became leader of Germany, and his campaign to conquer neighboring countries set off a new global conflict in 1939. German armies were victorious at first, but were defeated in 1945 by their allied enemies. Japan joined the war in 1941, but was forced to surrender after the US attacked with atomic bombs in 1945. World War II caused between 60 and 80 million deaths, estimated to be around 4% of the entire population of the world before the war. 4%. I'll write this wrong one. So now, World War II, from 1939 to 1945, 60 to 80 million deaths. 80 million people killed. It was 4% of entire population. Why I wrote this? Because at that time there were not so many people on Earth. Let us calculate now when we have 8 billion people living on our planet, and if 4% of population will die in some of our next world wars, this is maybe even optimistic, because new wars will be maybe more and more advanced, with even more nuclear weapons used. 4% of today's population is 320 million people could die if it will be 4% of today's population. 320 million people, because of the war between humans on planet Earth. We must all hope that the future will not bring us such terrifying wars, and that the mankind will be more aware of a terrible cost that wars brings. Although today we have big wars in Europe and Middle East, I hope that the humans will in the end become better than they are now. Thank you for your attention. Good night, and I hope that you can